to kick off by looking at some chord theory. And I think a lot of people, they have different parameters for what the different skill levels are. And it makes my head whirl sometimes because you got novice and then you got beginner. Then you have advanced beginner and then you have a beginner intermediate, and it can get really kind of crazy. So the way I look at it is sort of just generally beginner, intermediate, advanced. And if you're in the advanced group, you probably already know pretty well about, playing melody, playing chords. You're probably working on your own arrangements and able to play more complex things. And if you're not, don't worry about it. This is all information that is something that is good to know in general across the board. But specifically for people who are looking to understand more about the whys of music and how it works and why it works, this kind of thing will really, really help you, especially when it comes to making your own arrangements. And we'll talk a little bit about that today and how I came up with the piece that we're going to work on towards the end of the session. But for right now, go ahead and open up chord theory number 1, page number 1. And I'm going to go ahead and share the screen off of my iPad using AirPlay. We're going to share computer sound. And we're going to open that up. Now this has been giving me just a little bit of grief today, but we'll see. Ah, nice. All right. So this first page, we're talking about threading melody through chords. And there's a couple of things I want to point out about this graph. First of all, this is coming at it from a point of the key of C, not something that we run into a whole lot with the mountain dulcimer since we're kind of hanging out in the key of D. But since there are no flats and no sharps, it's a great way to kind of just visualize everything. And I'll explain what it is that we're looking at right now. First of all, and I'll get into markup here. Embiggen this first of all. And then I'll get into my markup. Choose a nice bright color like red. Good. Okay. The first thing I'm going to show you here is this little trick involving the scale. So we've got the C major scale there, C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, 7 different notes. For every key that we play in, we've got this scale, and then we've got the key signature that goes along with every key. C has no flats and no sharps, so it's kind of easy to start with. In the key of D, we've got F sharp and C sharp. We've got 2 sharps there. And this is our template that we can work from to create all kinds of stuff. And everything that we really need to know is right there in the scale. So the first thing we want to look at is how I came up with the chords that you see in the green box below the scale. This is a fun trick, and it works with every single scale for every single key. The first thing I want to mention is that there are 7 different notes in the scale, and so we number each one of those notes from 1 to 7. And those are our scale degrees, and they become very, very important as we continue working with chord theory and things like that. You can build a chord off of every single note in the scale using that note as the root of the chord, the lowest note in the chord. So we can build chords off of C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And just because of the way diatonic theory works, and diatonic basically means within the scale. The way the theory works, if you build chords off the 1st, 4th, and 5th notes of the scale, you will end up with major chords. If you build off of the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th notes of the scale, you'll end up with minor chords. And if you build a chord off the 7th note of the scale, you will end up with what's called a diminished chord. That's 7 chords built off of each one of the 7 notes in the scale, and that's any scale. So that means that You know, our chords 1, 4, 5 will be major. You've heard of a 1, 4, 5 chord progression. That means all the naturally occurring major chords in that key are going to be used in that song. And then 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and then 7 is diminished. So we would name it whatever if it's major, minor, or diminished. So you'll notice that 1, 4, and 5 are C, F, and G major. You'll notice that 2, 3, and 6 are D minor, E minor, and A minor. And that B has got this funky little degree symbol next to it, and that's a shorthand for diminished. You can also write DIM next to it, and that means diminished. If you want to jot this off to the side on a note somewhere, and just real briefly what a major chord is, what a minor chord is, and what a diminished chord is. A major chord is a root, a major third, and a perfect fifth. And those are elements of scale degrees there. A minor chord is very similar. It's got the root and it's got the perfect fifth. It's what we do with that middle note that makes the difference. For a major chord, it's a major third interval, and for a minor chord, it's a minor third interval. So we bring that middle note down a half step. We flatten that middle note and make it a minor third, and that gives us a minor chord. A diminished chord is like a minor chord. The root is there, and the minor third is there. But we take the fifth and we actually bring it down a half step, and that is called diminishing that particular note. And so it's an odd sounding chord, but it serves its purpose in the whole scheme of things. So we know what to name them, but how do I know what's inside of those chords? And this is where it gets fun. So let's figure out what notes are inside of a C major chord. What we're going to do is we're going to look at that scale, and we're going to start with C. So I'm going to go ahead and make a little red dot right up here. Now I'm going to hop, skip, and jump until I end up with 3 notes. So from C, I'm going to hop over the next note in the scale. I'm not going to include it. I'm going to hop right over it and go to the note afterwards, and that's going to be E. So we got 2 notes in the chord. Now we're going to add our fifth, basically. So we're going to hop over the next note. We're not going to include it. And we'll stop at the next note, and we will include that. C, E, and G are the 3 notes that are inside of C major. This works with any scale. So you can do this for D major as well, and any other key you want to work in. We're not going to go outside of this at all. Every single ingredient of every single chord is going to come from this scale. So let's get rid of that. Let's go to our next major chord. That's going to be F. So here we go, F, hop over G, and go to A. Now this scale wraps around. So when you're doing this exercise, you want to make sure that you don't write out the 8-note scale that has the octave above the root. You want to write out just those 7 notes, because this wraps around when you're doing this trick. So after we start at F as our root, hop over G and go to A, we're going to hop over B and then wrap around, which means we're going to land on C. So I'm going to hop over B, go out here, and then we're going to boomerang back over here. So F, A, and C are the ingredients of F major. Let's do the same thing with G. We start at G. We're going to hop over A and go to B and add that. Then we're going to hop over C and add D. G, B, and D are the ingredients of G major. It's an awesome trick. You do this enough times, just write out a scale you want to work in and do the hop, skip, and jump. And after a while, you'll familiarize yourself with all of the inner workings of the chords. Let's work on the minor now, starting with D. We're going to hop over E and go to F. We're going to hop over G and go to A. D, F, and A are the ingredients of D minor. E minor is E, G, and B. I love this trick. It's so great because all you have to do is write down 7 letters and hop, skip, and jump. A minor, A, C, and E. And there are the ingredients. And then we got one more here. It's the diminished. We're going to start with B. We'll hop over C and go to D. We'll hop over E and go to F. B, D, and F is your diminished chord, your B diminished chord. Those are all of the chords, the diatonic, the naturally occurring chords that we get when we're working out of a key. We've got 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and 1 diminished chord.
Question, Bang.
Yeah.
When you're doing like the last one you did, B, D, F, does it have to be the D and F below the B, or can it be the ones above it?
It can be the ones above it.
Okay.
At that point, when you're using notes that are, not necessarily right next to each other, what you'll end up happening is you're going to be revoicing that chord and changing the pitches. So instead of the root being the lowest pitch, the third, whether it be major or minor, third being that middle note, and then the fifth being the highest pitched note, you could certainly move those around and you'll get different inversions of these chords. As long as they're fairly close together, they will sound like what they're supposed to sound like. When you start going further than an octave away, you kind of start getting into a different territory where these scale degrees represent different things. For example, the major second of every scale, if you were to go ahead and leap an octave higher and choose the major second in the second octave, we no longer call that a major second. We now call it a 9 because it's going beyond 8, which is the octave, and 9 would be the second in the next octave. So you're going to get a different sound and a different quality to the chords. And the further away from each other that these notes get in each chord, you lose the relationships that make that chord sound the way it's supposed to. They're still pretty. There's still all kinds of fun stuff you can do with 9th chords, 10th chords, 11th chords, and 13th. But it won't be just your average major or minor chord. You're going to have to start putting numbers after it because the relationship between the notes is further apart. Think about, like a C, E, and G. We would call that a root position chord. And think about that as a nice, tightly woven sweater, a really good Christmas sweater that is actually going to keep you warm. Think about these other chords where we maybe take C and move it up an octave out of the octave. Now that sweater is a little loosely woven, and maybe the holes in the sweater in between the yarn is a little bit wider, and it's not going to keep you, it may look really cool, but it's not going to keep you warm in the wintertime. So that's a way of looking at these close voicings, tight voicings, and these more spread out voicings. But you can certainly, go outside the octave to get different harmonies.
Bing,
Yeah,
when you first started, you said 1, 4, 5 is major, 2, 3, 6 is minor.
that's correct.
Okay.
And don't forget your 7th. If you build off the 7th, that's going to be diminished. So we got 3 major chords, 3 minor chords, and we have 1 diminished chord that we can work with in that key. And that means all of those notes are fair game for melody, and all of those chords are fair game for your chord progression, and they can be blended in all kinds of different ways. And as long as you're using those 7 notes, and as long as you're using those 7 chords, you are playing diatonically, and everything is just going to work out amazing. Not a lot of thought is required to make it work. Rules like key signatures and things like this, of course, were made to be altered, broken, stepped around, and what makes a lot of different types of music very interesting is when we go outside of the key and we use notes from different scales, and we use chords that are not part of that key signature, borrowed chords from another key signature. And that makes for some really interesting music. But as soon as you get outside of that, it requires a lot more thought into how you're going to make it work because of the harmonies between these. All of these are going to be wonderfully harmonic together. But and you bring in, let's say, for example, you bring in a B flat and you want to do something with that. Well, now you've got different harmonies that are going to react differently. And some ways you can use it and it'll be absolutely brilliant. In other ways, you may find that you're kind of painting yourself into a corner. But there are a lot of examples of certain chords and melody notes that you can bring into the picture that won't complicate things. And hopefully we can touch upon some of that. So I wanted to show you that trick first of all, and that's how I ended up with our resultant chords in the green box: C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and B diminished. So here's the next thing that I want to show you, and this is kind of fun. Take a look at the scale below that, and nothing's changed there, and nothing's changed in the green box. But notice that I've extended the scale down vertically from C, and they're in different color boxes. The green boxes are what we call chord tones. So we're identifying which notes of the scale are actually inside of the chord. And so we have C, E, and G. These, when you're writing melody, you can play melody over the top using C, E, and G over the top of a C major chord, and it's always going to sound perfect. Why? Because those notes are actually inside the chord. Now, I don't have my dulcimer set up for C major right now. I'm in D-A-D. But let me show you what I'm talking about with D. And so let's look at our scale: D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C sharp. So D major, the three ingredients, if we hop, skip, and jump, would be D, F sharp, and A. So if I'm playing a D major chord, and then I play D, F sharp, or A as a melody note, they're going to sound great. Nothing but harmony, complete and total consonance. You're not going to have any dissonance or anything weird and funky happening. Those are safe notes. I call them lily pad notes. And what happens is you got a melody, and that melody is moving. And then the melody is going to chill out. So maybe you're singing it, or maybe you've written a song for a soloist to sing, and and that note's going to sustain. If you're going to hold a note over that chord, it's usually best practice to choose a note that's a chord tone. Use a note that's actually inside of that chord. Hop on that lily pad. Buzz around like a little dragonfly and go in all of those different notes in the scale. But when it comes time to land, you're going to land on a lily pad note, one that is actually inside the chord. Then we've got these in the red box. That's the fourth, F, and the seventh, which is B. So these are great for melody too. They're very powerful, and that melody can bounce from F to C to E and go all over the place. But if you want to hold an F or hold a B over a C major chord, you actually are changing that chord from simply C major to something completely different. So if your intention was to write a C major chord and do a melody over the top of that, you will be changing the chord if you add F or B to it. Just be aware of that. And then finally, we've got these blue boxes, the major second and the major sixth. These kind of leave you wanting, these two. And let me get off there. These kind of leave you wanting a little bit. They're not as strong. They're great for passing tones, meaning that's part of the dragonfly flying around. But as far as hanging on to them for anything, they're restless. They want to do something else. They don't want to hang out with the chord. They want to keep moving. So out of all of these notes, some are better than others. Your best choice for being on top of that chord will be the first, third, and fifth notes of the scale. Your next best is going to be the fourth and the seventh in the red boxes. And your least, optimal are going to be the second and the sixth. And that's just because of their character. That's just in where they are. And I'll show you another graph here down the road that will open things up as far as moving chords around and things of that nature. So let me use G major as an example. This is a G major chord. And here's our notes of the G major scale. So it's like right about the same time every session, my dog loses his mind. What's he doing? All right. So let's experiment with this with G major. So let me go on the first or third or fifth notes of the scale and see what happens. These all work really nice. Okay. Now let me bring in the fourth note of the scale, C, and also the seventh note of the scale, which is G, and let's see how those work out. Oh, sorry, not G, but G. Yeah, the seventh note. Sorry, F sharp. Now see how I'm playing like G major, but that F sharp, it sticks out like a sore thumb, doesn't it? It's really an awkward thing to hang on to when you're hanging on to that G major. And so it's often really best used as a passing tone that leads you back to G. That resolution's very strong right there. Going back to the root. Let's pull that C in there. Now that's pretty, but you know how right now it just feels like, drop the other shoe, will ya? That's a restless chord right there. It's not restful. It doesn't want to sit right there and be happy. It has something more to say. It wants to resolve. It wants to go somewhere else. And you know where it would be really happy going right now? It would love, being the fourth note of the scale, it would love to resolve to the third note of the scale. Oh, yes, that's so much better right there. So that four, that note, that melody note based on the fourth note of the scale, that is going to give you some tension, which is going to propel the music forward a bit more. But as far as using it over the top of a G major chord, your major chord, it's going to be a little distracting. So you can use it, but you also want to be able to resolve and take it someplace else. And then that seventh note, same thing. You don't want to hang out with it, but you do want to use it to take you back or take you someplace else. Let's look at the second and the sixth. There's the second note of the scale. It's pretty, but it's not resolved. It definitely is feeling restless. It wants to go somewhere else, and it wants to resolve either to the third. Oh yeah, nice resolution. Or it wants to go back home to the root. Nice solid resolution there as well. Now about that sixth note. Again, kind of pretty, but it's restless. It wants to resolve someplace else. And it doesn't want to resolve up to the seventh because there's just more tension waiting there. But it wouldn't mind resolving down to the fifth. resolution. So this graph right here is a good way of looking at your melody. And if you got a chord and you want that melody to go buzzing across the top of it, then all these notes will work fine. None of them sounds bad. But if you're going to hang out with a note for a very long period of time, make sure it's one of the notes that's actually in the chord. All right, so just a quick guide there on your melody notes, and as you're moving things around, how to incorporate that so that you can go in. You can always play it by ear and go with your gut and say, this sounds good, this not so much. But if you go in informed and have this information in front of you, you can actually compose, or you can hear these differences in the arrangements of tunes you're working on and know this is why this sounds this way, or this is why this doesn't sound this way, by knowing how this whole operation works. Now, here's where it gets really fun. Go ahead and take out page 2. So what's really interesting here is, yes, you can use the notes of the scale with all of the chords you're playing inside of the key. But when you're playing an F major chord, it actually has its own key, F major. And to have the same choices that you had with the one chord, with C, you need to be thinking about, oh, I am temporarily right now in the key of F. It's not true. You are still in the key of C. But because you're now working with F major, you're going to take the F major scale and use that to do the same thing that we did with C. And so those notes will be different. So you can, at this point, which is why I brought up B flat, you can play a B flat here and it'll sound fine. So this kind of bolsters the whole idea about knowing a certain number of scales for use when you start moving through the chords and changing the melody around a little bit. Now, somewhere down the road here, we'll have the scale harmonizations written out for you to see. But the order that I wrote these things on, excuse me, that I wrote these things under was, 1, 4, 5 is major, 2, 3, 6 minor, and 7 is diminished. That switches around a little bit when we are playing in a minor key. So here you can see that the order of chords is still the same if you start from the third note, C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished. But we're now starting with A minor as the first note in the first chord, or A is the first note and A minor is the first chord when you're working with A minor. And we will get into that later, but it's handy to know how to write these out. And this scale degree chart you see down here at the bottom, you'll notice that some of those numbers are uppercase and some of those numbers are lowercase. The uppercase ones are major chords, the lowercase ones are minor chords. The lowercase with a degree symbol is your diminished chord. It's a shorthand way of looking at the chords, and this is where it gets really fun. I'm about to show you how this works with the major and specifically in D major. Let's go to number 3, the progressions. And I'm going to make this big. And here we have all of our scale degrees, and we have our D major scale starting with the tablature down there at the bottom. Notice I only have the scale degrees under those first 7 notes. When we're talking about scale degrees or building chords and doing that hop, skip, and jump trick, We don't want to include the octave, just those 7 notes. But there's our entire scale. But there's our scale degrees. And there you see 1, 4, and 5 are uppercase. We use Roman numerals because you can do upper and lowercase Roman numerals. You can't do that with Arabic numerals. And so whenever you see chord progressions written out, they are typically written out in these Roman numerals. So 1, 4, and 5, there you can see they're uppercase. 2, 3, and 6, you can see that they are lowercase. And 7, you can see that it's lowercase with the degree symbol. So in the case of D major, the 1, 4, 5, it's going to be D major, G major, and A major. Your minor second is going to be E minor. Your minor third is going to be F sharp minor. Your minor sixth is going to be B minor. And your diminished seventh is going to be C sharp diminished. So here's our D major, E minor, 1, 1, 3, F sharp minor, 2, 2, 4, G major, 3, 3, 5, A major, 4, 4, 6 and a half, B minor, 5, 5, 7. This one's a little weird. C sharp diminished, 6 and a half, 6, 8. An odd sounding chord, isn't it? C sharp diminished, 6 and a half, 6, 8. And then our octave, 7, 7, 9 with D major. Super important to know the possibilities of all of the chords. Know your chords and know the inversions. Know everything you can about that key signature, because these next exercises are all going to be playing on that. That's a lot of theory, you guys. It's tough. It's very, very tough. And I don't know how much study and theory that you have done already, but I was encouraged by 2 different gentlemen in 2 different directions when it came to music theory. I've been playing music on the mountain dulcimer since 1986, and I've been in bands with the mountain dulcimer, playing rock and roll and country and all kinds of stuff. But I didn't know my notes, my chords, my scales, none of that. It was all by ear, which is great if you've got the ability to do that. But when your band members say, hey, Bing, right here at this part, at the chorus, what chord are you playing? And all my answer could be was, it's the chord that sounds like this. I didn't have any answers for them because I didn't know the theory. And so in 2006, I went and stayed with Jerry Rockwell for a little bit in Ohio. And he is a theory guru. He went back to school later in life and he studied theory. He said, you need to go to school and you need to study theory in order to speak this language and understand things. I'm thinking, how am I going to do that? I mean, that's a lot of money to go, or maybe community college will work, but I mean, I couldn't see how to make that work. But I studied with him a little bit and, got his book and started to wrap my head around it. And we got the scale degrees and stuff like that, and my eyes just started crossing. I'm like, gosh, this stuff it's thick. How am I supposed to get my head around it? And then I talked to Robert Forrest. Some of you may know Robert Forrest. And I said, Robert, do you think I should go back to school and pick up music theory? His first response was, what, and incur mountains of student debt? I'm like, well, how else am I supposed to do it? He said, you're hungry enough for the knowledge. Go out there and find it yourself. Buy some books, watch some videos, talk to some people, but just don't go into debt, not at this point in your life. And I went, wow. From somebody who was on the faculty of a college as a college advisor, that's pretty good advice. I thought, okay, I'll go look for it myself. And so I did. And I bought lots of music theory books, and I drilled and I studied. And I basically taught myself fundamental music theory. I'm still learning it. There's a lot of it I still don't understand, but I learned enough to be dangerous. And I learned enough to understand what was going on this in this instrument on my lap. And once I got that understanding, everything changed. I suddenly could do things and think of things and come up with ideas for things that I couldn't do before. Think of it like learning a language and you're going into a different country and you really want to be able to hang out with the locals. You want to eat like the locals. You want to party like the locals. You want to find the spots that only locals know, but you don't speak the language. You have to go with a tour group. Well, you're not going to see all that cool stuff or experience any of that. But if you learn enough of the language to get yourself around, that region of the world opens itself up to you. And that's what this is. We're learning a musical language and applying it to this dulcimer, this region of the world. So it can be a little exasperating when you first start, but you will come to a point where all of a sudden everything clicks and becomes wonderful. And from there, you just can't get enough in your head. It's a really, really wonderful thing. So all of that theory stuff we just went into, we're going to put it into practice now, and this is where the fun stuff really starts to come in. We're going to take a look at some common chord progressions using the notes of the D major scale, or the chords that come out of D major. So hopefully you wrote those down, what each one of them are for each of the scale degrees. Take a look at these 6 chord progressions down here at the bottom of the page. So, you know, people can get fancy all you want to, but a wise man once said, all I got's a red guitar, 3 chords, and the truth. So many songs in this world don't have to be complex, where it's loaded up with all kinds of chords and borrowed chords and melody, chromatic notes and all that. You can write a perfectly wonderful tune with 3 chords. You can write a perfectly wonderful tune with 2 chords and 4 melody notes. Very, very easy stuff. Because people don't necessarily want to hear complex. They want to hear a song that they can sing the second time they hear it. And you can do that with basic diatonic chord progressions and melodies. That's why the most popular form in the world is 1-4-5. It's the naturally occurring major chords in any key. And if you can play those 3 chords, you can play literally hundreds and thousands of songs. Now the chord progressions usually mean that this is how the chords move and these are the chords you'll be working with, but there are ways you can swap them around. If you were to play 1-4-5 simply that way, you end up with something that sounds like this: D, G, A, back to D. You've heard a bunch of songs that go like this. And what I'll do real quick here is I'm going to put an inset into actually, if you've got that on the screen, I can go ahead and stop sharing here so that you can see what I'm doing on the dulcimer. And then I'm going to bring the mini cam into the picture. And then I'm going to go over and replace my inset, because it does tend to freeze when I swap out of the program. So now that it's back, I'll go back to Zoom. And now we've got a view of the dulcimer on my lap. All right. So, you know, D, G, and A. We've done songs like this before. But they don't all necessarily move from D to G to A. Sometimes we go from D to G, then go back to D, the 1 chord, and then go to A. Boiled them cabbage is one of those tunes. Boil them cabbage down, boys, turn them hoe cakes round. 1-4, 1-5. Some songs go right to the 5 chord and then walk down. So there already are 3 variations to the 1-4-5 chord progression. And that's kind of what makes it interesting. We don't just have to go in order, and we can play those chords for as many measures as we want, or split them up to where they're actually moving 2 chords to a measure. We can go to the 1 chord to the 5 chord to the 4 chord, 1 chord to the 5 chord to the 1 chord to the 4 chord. Just with those, there's a lot of different permutations there that we can work with. But it's the most popular form in the world, no doubt about it. All around the world, people use the 1-4-5 chord progression. And because these forms are so popular, and we can do so many different things with melody, often people say, well, why reinvent the wheel? Let's use this chord progression and just do something different with the melody and the arrangement and how we sing it and the lyrics, and that makes a different tune. So take a look at Summer Lovin'. Summer Lovin' is 1-4-5-4. So you could just play that simple. It moves up the ladder and it comes back down the ladder. But if you change up the rhythm and the way you play it a little bit, all of a sudden you can see why I call it the Summer Lovin' chord progression. So, summer lovin', da dee da dee da, da 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 dee da dee dum dum. Basic chord progression, a little bit of different movement to it, and there you got a song from Greece. Doo-wop heaven, man, doo-wop heaven was all over the place in the 40s and 50s. And this shorthand, the uppercase and lowercase, lets us know immediately, looking at doo-wop heaven, we know we got a minor chord in there. That second chord is a minor chord, it's lowercase. So we've got D going to B minor, going to G, the 4 chord, and A, the 5 chord. You couldn't pass a street corner in Brooklyn without hearing this chord progression. Sorry. Just that movement, including that minor chord in there, changes the flavor of things a little bit. And there you had the basis for so many songs that came out of the 40s and 50s, the doo-wop and all kinds of great old slow time dancing rock and roll tunes. Certain chords like to move to other chords more than others, and they create motion and they create sensations. Look at the rolling progression. It starts off on the 4 chord, which is kind of weird. Then it goes to the 1 chord. Then it goes back to the 4 chord, and then it goes to the 5 chord. This results in a loop that just lends itself well to songs that just keep going on and on and on without ever seeming to really stop. So if you're doing like an old, like a Bob Dylan song, these are perfect for the kind of stuff that he used to do, This is the song that never ends. It's got 118 verses. Welcome, my friends. This is a protest song we can all sing. It's only got 3 chords, but joy it will bring, and we keep rolling along, so forth and so on. So you can set up certain personalities for your tune by using well-established chord progressions. If you want to write a doo-wop song, you don't have to go, let me think about how to do that. You can analyze your favorite songs, chart out what the chord progression is, and anytime you want to write something that sounds like it was lost in the 50s, boom, you pull out that progression. That's a nice, easy way to get started with writing your own material without you having to think about, well, gosh, what comes after this chord? What comes after this chord? Just take a chord progression. Those can't be copywritten. No one can say, hey, that's my chord progression. It doesn't happen. It does not happen at all. Melodies? Yeah, you kind of have to watch yourself with melodies and lyrics and things like that. But chord progressions? This is all free game, and that's why people use them to evoke certain memories or feelings or whatever. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the tearjerker. This is one of my favorite chord progressions of all time, because if you want to break somebody's heart with a piece of sad music, you can really do no harm with the 1 to minor 3 chord progression. And then we've got a 4 following it to make it seem a little bit easier, and then you got the 1 chord and then the 5 chord. So we got D major, F sharp minor is going to be the minor third, 2-2-4. Then we go to G, then we come back home to D, and then we go to A. Oh, this is a sad song, sometimes hopeful in the end. Oh, but the minor third makes it so sad. But there's still hope when we rise, oh, when we rise, oh, when we rise. It's helpful to know the shorthand of this stuff. If you're like, gosh, I got a sad song I want to sing, and then putting it in there. The way these chords move back and forth and the way they touch each other have been proven over centuries to have certain psychological, emotional impact. And it can get really super deep when you really start looking down deep into it. And one of my favorite tunes of all time is Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, and where he actually describes to you what he's doing to you with the chords and how it moves and why it moves. I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? It goes like this, the fourth, that's the fourth of the chord right there, that's the fourth of the progression. The fifth, that's the fifth, that's the 5 chord right there. The major, the minor fall. Even though going upwards, he's talking about emotionally bringing a minor chord in after 2 powerful, happy major chords to make you feel sad. It goes like this, the 4th, the 5th, the minor fall. Oh, we've broken our hearts, we need a lift, the major lift. It's all right there. It's really an incredible piece of music just because he's describing how powerful chords are in and of themselves. Finally, the modern rock. It's not so modern anymore. This was a bit more modern about 10 years ago. I think people have moved to a different sort of motion, and I need to update my materials, but this one is still pretty good. The 1-5 minor 6-4. And it's not necessarily just modern rock, because you could float some stuff from the 60s in there, as well. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. That comes out of that same pool and that same motion. This is just 6 chord progressions. So this is the scale-based chord as we move up. This is all for the key of D. So above each stack, you'll see the name of the chord. And then down below at the tablature, that I mentioned earlier for playing through them. This is essentially L-shaped chords all the way up until you get to the C-sharp diminished chord. That changes the shape a bit because we flattened the 5. But those are all of your chords right there that are diatonic within the key, within the scale. So in order for you to get really proficient at this, it really becomes necessary to know all of the different ways that you can play these chords. So, from D major, that 002, it's basically an L-shaped chord. We're just not fretting the bass in the middle string. They're just left open. So we are playing the top of the L by putting our finger down at the 2nd fret. But then knowing that we can also play the slant version of D major, and we can invert that, flip it over. We can also play the extended slant version of D major and invert that. So right there, automatically, there are 3 different ways, 3, 4, 5 different ways to play these basic chords. Same thing with E minor. And that's just in the 1st octave. Then you've got all the other possibilities available to you in the 2nd octave as well. So that's something that I would recommend, is getting used to playing many different versions of this. It's going to help you down the road quite a bit. Underneath each of the chords, we've got the scale degrees. Once again, cannot hammer those home enough. And then we'll illustrate this next point very, very clearly with the next thing I show you. But see the chord leading, also known as voice leading? These are sort of a roadmap to how chords like to go. Some chords have got a very, very strong pull. The most powerful chords in the scale are the ones based off of the 1st note of the scale and the 5th note of the scale. The 1 chord to the 5 chord and the 5 chord to the 1 chord is a very powerful move. And then from there it decreases, the 1 chord to the 7 chord back to 1, very powerful, but not as strong as the 5 chord. So when you naturally gravitate towards these, when we're moving chords, you're not just moving a chord. You're moving 3 notes inside of that chord as well. So when you end up moving the 1 chord, say, to the 5 chord, the relationships between the notes inside of the chord are what create these different emotions and these different psychologies and different types of feelings that come out of the music. It's even better if you can change the position of those notes in the chord, change the pitches around as you're moving, and it gives you a lot of really sweet options for painting the picture that you want to paint with music. So the 1 leads to any chord. You can leave from the root and go anywhere you want to, and it's always going to be good. The 2 wants to go to the 4 chord, the 5 chord, and the 7. The 3 wants to go to the 2, the 4, or the 6. The 4 likes to go to the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7. You can go anywhere else, but they're not going to be as harmonically interesting or powerful as the way the chords want to go. And there's a lot of math involved there that I do not want to get into at this point. The 5 just really wants to go home. Sure, you can move the 5 chord to whatever you want to, but man, it really packs a punch when it comes back home again. It's like the ultimate chord progression for dropping the mic, right? Going to from your A to D. Boom, period at the end of the sentence. That's like a great way to end a phrase, a great way to end a tune, very powerful, the 5 going to the 1. The 6th chord will lead to the 2, the 4, the 5, and the 1 chord. And the diminished chord will lead to the 1 chord and also the 3 chord. Now, just by looking at that gobbledygook right there in front of your face is probably not going to help you right away. But in time, it'll get a little bit better. But I've got a little chart here I've created that is going to hit home for you a bit better, and I'm going to demonstrate along with that chart what's happening here. Take a look at page 5, repertoire chord leading. So first of all, this chart wraps around. It does move not only powerfully right now from right to left, because we're starting with the root, we're starting with the 1 chord, leading from right to left. This also does move from left to right. It wraps around. So going from left to right, the 1 would encounter the 3 chord first, and then the 6, then the 2/4, then the 7/5. So you can get there from here no matter which direction you go. Here's how this works. You're going to start with your root. You're going to start with the tonic. You're going to start with the 1 chord. If you want to keep things very, very simple, just move. Don't go too far from the tonic and make small moves. Go to the next column and no further. Keep it simple. Go to the next column over. And then don't go too far from home. So once you get over a couple more columns, come running back home again. I'll give you an example of that. I'm going to go 1, 5, 4, 5, 1. So here's our D major. Here's our A. Here's our G. Here's our A. Back to our 1. Shortest song ever, but we could end it right there. That's a very satisfying movement between chords, and we're just going 1 column at a time. We can make that trip a little bit longer. Let's go 1, 5, 4, 6. Then come back to 4, 5, and 1. Here's our D. A. G. B minor. Ooh. Back to G. To A. And to the 1. We can keep extending that. Let's go to the journey to the end of the chord leading chart. Let's go all the way to 3 and back again. D. Here's our 5 chord. Here's our 4 chord. Our haunting B minor. Ooh, nice F sharp minor. Back to B minor. To G. Our 5 chord, and then 1. So we had ourselves a nice little major romp that suddenly got really sad and serious towards the end, and then it brought us back to happy. So this is a great roadmap for coming up with stuff. Now we're just getting warmed up. We can go the other direction now and keep it close to home. 1, 3, 6, back to 3, back to 1. Here's the heartbreak. B minor. Back. And then back to 1. So it's got a different feel to it going in the other direction. You get into the minors a lot quicker that way. And the 3 to 1 isn't that strong of a resolution. Listen to it again. F sharp minor to D major. It resolves nicely, but it's nowhere near as powerful as A, the 5 chord, to 1. And why is that? It's because there's a lot changing in this A. We got A, C sharp, and E shifting to D, F sharp, and A. With the F sharp minor, so much of what's there is also in D. So not a lot is changing. We've got A, we've got F sharp, and then we've got C sharp. So, not a lot changes. One note changes between those two chords. It doesn't have as much oomph to it. The most oomph happens when each one of those notes resolves beautifully to something else. So technically, going from right to left is going to give you stuff that is really going to hit home. So you could take the long way home, take the long way home. You could take the long way home by leaving 1, hitting 3, then 6, and then going 4, 5, 1. So in that respect, all roads do really come right back to 1.